for allowing us to have an open discussion, and we wish that the answers to these questions would be to your glory and honor, but that it would help edify us and help us settle more firmly into this truth that you're giving to us at this time. We thank you for your presence. Ask that you continue to pour out your latter rain out upon us, even in this type of meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.
So the first question is, what type of time are we declaring? Prophetic, in parentheses, definite, prophetic, I think what they mean by that is definite time, or probationary time. And what are the differences between the times Sister White mentions? So, I guess my first point of reference would be 7 BC 971 paragraph 7. This is the only comprehensive reference point to a passage that's found in Revelation chapter 10. I'll give you the reference again. This is manuscript 59, 1900. It's in the study Bibles, but it's 7 BC 971 paragraph 7. 971 paragraph 7, 7 BC. So the reference for that, if we turn to Revelation 10, is verse 6. Revelation 10 verse 6. This angel that comes down, swear by him that liveth forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that therein are, and the earth and the things that therein are, and the sea and the things which are therein, that there should be time no longer. So when we teach Revelation 10 and this angel coming down, we mark this event as being 1840. We can mark that for a number of reasons. One of them is that he has his feet upon the land and the sea, indicating the worldwide extent of the message. And that's our primary reference point, I guess. And we see that there's an empowerment of the message that's occurring here. So there's a bit of symbology in this passage to indicate this is 1840. So what I want to suggest is in verse 3 speaks with a loud voice, a loud cry. That 1840 is the loud cry for the Millerites. It's the primary reference point for the loud cry that we would mark in Millerite history. After the disappointment in... whose question is this, by the way?
It's me.
After the disappointment in April 1844, they get into a new dispensation, if I can express it that way, and they're going to have a second midnight cry, which you can mark July, August, the cry we often mark in August 14th, 15th at the Exeter Camp meeting. So the Millerites have an internal argument to explain their past, and I think it's Storrs that is going to make this comment I'm just about to tell you, is that they're going to identify that August is the true midnight cry, and they're going to reference that in the context. If this is a true, then there was a previous one, which you might conclude would be the false one, but they don't want to use the word false because they don't believe that they have been led into error. So they call the first one the alarm. They said the first one was the alarm and this is the true. They don't tell you where that first midnight cry was. So I would guess, I don't think guess is the right way of saying that, would be 1798. That's where you could legitimately mark the cry. But I think 1840 is a far better waymark to use as the cry, based upon Revelation 10, based upon the prophetic ministry of William Foy. William Foy has a vision in 1842, but I think it can be demonstrated that his vision is actually in 1840, even though he has the vision 2 years later. So, commenting on all of that, she says in 971, paragraph 7, this time, when he says time no longer, which the angel declares with a solemn oath, is not the end of this world's history, neither of probationary time, but of prophetic time, which should precede the advent of our Lord. That is, the people will not have another message upon definite time. After this period of time, reaching from 1842 to 1844, there can be no definite tracing of the prophetic time, longest reckoning reaching to the autumn of 1844. So there's a lot of information in this passage, but essentially what she's saying is that from 1840, when the midnight cry is going to be given, when this angel comes down with this loud cry, what this angel is crying is that the bridegroom's about to come, behold the bridegroom cometh, 4 years later in 1844. That's the reference point, I believe. We know that they make a mistake, which is the better experience that John is having here in the chapter, and that time period is going to be extended, if you want to use that phrase. It's not really extended this because they have made a mistake, but it gets extended 6 months, from the spring to the autumn of 1844. So Ellen White's talking about this time, Revelation 10, is the end of prophetic time. It's not the end of probationary time. So the question that Sister Ruth is asking is, if that's what Ellen White's talking about, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the end of probationary time, or are we talking about the end of prophetic time? So to me, what we're marking is the end of probationary time. If we're going to talk about 2019, Raphia, close of probation, in a different structure, we would identify that as midnight. That waymark that we're speaking of is the end of probationary time. So, if we looked at the foundational truth of the message that we teach, Daniel 11:40-45, those verses bring you to Daniel 12:1. It says, "And at that time Michael shall stand up," and that time that's being referred to is in the time of the end, that period of time from 1989 to when Michael stands up. The whole focus is the steps that bring you from the time of the end to when probationary time ends. So that's the time period that we're handling. The problem that we're facing with, which is what the question's alluding to, is when we're dealing with probationary time and its end, not the prophetic time that's being dealt with in Revelation 10, how do we grapple with what probationary time looks like and the identification of it? As Adventists, we're taught, indoctrinated, because we've been burned before on this issue, the Millerite history, that we can't calculate the end of probationary time. But as we're all aware, Elder Jeff's dealing with this at this very camp meeting, and we've been grappling with this for the last 6 years now in our movement, and I would argue even longer than 6 years. I think you would have heard him, I think in the last presentation, he said, we started delving into time setting and we didn't even realise how the Lord was taking us there step by step. We were almost unconscious of it, because the issue of time setting, Daniel chapter 5 mini tickle your fasting, which is 126 shekels, entered into this movement before 2012, where a prediction begins to be made that's going to use time to begin to speak to the close of probationary time. So I don't think the question is as easy to answer. What type of time are we declaring? Are we declaring prophetic time or definite time? She's using the word definite time because that's a phrase that Ellen White speaks of when speaking about 1844. She uses this phrase, definite time. So Sister Ruth is tagging that with prophetic time, because you can get prophetic time from this statement, you can get definite time from another Spirit Prophecy quote, or are we dealing with probationary time? So I think we're pretty sure, at least I hope we are, I am, in my thinking, that we're dealing with the end of probationary time. But because we've been trained, indoctrinated, that the subject of probationary time, no one will understand when that time will come to an end, when probation will close, when will Michael stand up. We've been taught that no man knoweth the day nor the hour when these things are all going to happen. And we are all being challenged about that concept, that idea. So we're talking about probationary time, but we're approaching the subject of when probationary time is going to end by actually calculating the date for that event.
Yeah, can I just ask you one thing about the probationary time? What about the PBM that we're predicting now about Islam striking? Where does that come into? If we're talking about prophetic time.
Okay, so you've mentioned the word PBM.
Sorry, prediction before midnight.
No, I understand what PBM
Yes,
is.
sorry, yeah, I meant, what about, because you're just saying that we're talking about...
Okay, so a couple of things. If we're predicting probationary time, the close of probation, we want to understand the steps that bring us to that waymark. And some of those events we can calculate with some certainty. For instance, 2014, it's the date that we can calculate, which is not the end of probationary time by any measure. It's later on. We're now saying it's 2019. You mentioned PBM.
I mean, I'm talking about Islam, sorry. There's actually a prediction about Islam striking, so... Because we're actually making a prediction there. We're actually making a prediction there, aren't we?
July 18.
Yeah.
So I think what you're referring to are there other waymarks that we would predict separate and distinct from the close of probation?
Yes.
And what I want to suggest, if I can answer it this way, is no. So let me try and answer it the way I say no. Because if we're in a history that looks like this, and this is the close of probation, and I'll put a tick to say that we're going to predict that year, that say like 2019, we're going to see that there are other waymarks that we're not going to predict the date for, when I mean predicting, you know, prophetically in the future. So there are other waymarks that we will. So in this example, this would be 2019, and we've predicted this ahead of time. This would be 2018, and we have not predicted this ahead of time. So when you conflated the two arguments about Islam and PBM, I would argue that we could call this PBM, it's a title that we could give it, and even though we thought we could predict that, we've been shown to be incorrect in that assertion, that we were not able to predict this. There are other ones, such as 2014, which again were predicted. And there was 2012, which were not predicted. So each of those are prophetic waymarks in our line. We call this the line of the priest. And there are some we can predict and some we can't predict. So if you're going to talk about Islam, and then you're going to ask, I assume you're talking about July 18, which is what some of the discussions that we've had this weekend so far. When you start talking about 2020, my current understanding of this is that we're not predicting an event past close of probation. What we're doing is we're starting on a new clean sheet of paper this is not related to this. This is a different line of history, and our focus is Panion. So I'm not objecting to saying that's 2021, but I'm going to say that we should be predicting this. So when we come to these waymarks, what we're talking about are events that are going to lead to this, and this would be the close of probation. So if we're going to answer your questions, when I'm saying we're not predicting events after the close of probation, we're predicting events that lead you or bring you to the close of probation. Because this is the close of probation for the Levites, this is the close of probation for the priest, and you'll find that we can develop the same logic that will bring you to the close of probation for the Nethinims, and then it will bring you to Daniel 12:1. So I'm suggesting that we're going to be able to do this in a number of cycles if we're talking about the close of probation. So I just want to add one more point onto that. So even though I've spoken about the close of probationary time, tucked in the back of it, I think your question is that all we're going to do? And even though I said we're not predicting a date past the close of probation, we're predicting one before the close of probation, there's a caveat to that. Because if we go to this line and we said this is Daniel 12:1 and this is the second advent, I'm saying that there's a waymark here, and at this waymark it's going to be speaking about when that event's going to happen. And this is a close of probation for the 144,000, and this isn't. So what's being marked here, that this prediction of this date then becomes sometime in this history a prediction of this date, and this is going to be done by the priests, not the Levites, just as this is going to be done in the history of the 144,000, but it's not a close of probation. So we are marking things beyond the close of probation in that respect. But I'm saying 2020 is connected to a separate dispensation. Does it have spillover effects for us? Of course it does. So I don't know if that answers your question, Sister Ruth. Because I guess what's behind your question is, how do we calculate time? What's the methodology behind calculating time? And I think the more we look at this, at least for me, the more I take a position that I'm not actually sure what the rules are. What do we call it? Do we call it day for a year? Do we call it year for a day? Do we call it day for a day, year for a year? We seem to have mixed a number of different thoughts and ideas, because we're taking year for a year in many circumstances. We take days and convert them to years, day for a year. We take years and clock them back and make them into days. And then we just take symbols, often like mini mini tickle your fasting, 126 shekels, and turn that into 126 years. So I don't think we've got this definitive singular rule that says, okay, it's day for a year, that's what we're doing. We're looking at all of these things in a way that either we're going to come to a conclusion to say that it's all of the rules are all being merged into one.
Because I was thinking, if it's definite, if it's probationary time, we don't really have an issue to try and describe it that we're not doing definite time. But I don't know if it's a combination of two of them, probationary time or definite time.
When Ellen White uses that term definite time, I think what she's referring to is to say you can't go into Daniel 12 or Daniel 8, take that prophecy, which was a definite prophecy, and reapply that in the way that it was being used for the Millerite history. I think, I don't know if we can take her statement and stretch it to mean more than she intended. I think she just was trying to say, in Daniel 8, that history of the 2300-day prophecy that begins in 457 is going to end in 1844. It's talking about specific histories that 30 decrees written. Christ is going to go from one compartment in the Holy Sanctuary, 17th Sanctuary, to another one. What we can't do is try to adjust those dates. I think that's what she means by definite time. Because what we see now is that we can take 2300 as a symbol of judgment, as an example, and have a totally independent separate start date, which has got nothing to do with the third decree, and bring it to another date in our dispensation. And those beginning and end waymarks have got nothing connected with Christ moving from one apartment to another in the same way that Daniel 8, 13 and 14 are.
Yeah, because as I was studying this, I did see a pattern where the people rejected the old lie and then they tried to make their new dates. So, yeah, I see.
I just want to give one thought. Elder Jeff's alluded to the fact that someone is saying that 2019, November the 9th, is like October 22nd, 1844. So that's not a new thought. That's built into this model that we have. So that's correct. Now, when they get to October 22nd, and then you go post-October 22nd, and Ellen White's going to say, no more time setting, and then people, or this person was saying, well, that means, whether or not they're saying that or not, I don't know, but if that's what is being inferred, and they're saying, well, if there's no more time setting past October 22nd, so if this is 2019, this would be 1844, October 22nd, November 9th. So if we were to do that parallel, and Ellen White says here, no more time. So obviously we know that's correct. If there's no more time here, there would be no more time here. But if what this person, if what's being reported that they're saying is true, factual, that they're saying it this way, obviously what they're doing is they're taking this statement and they're twisting it, manipulating it to mean something that Ellen White never intended it to mean, which is part of what your question is about, the relationship between definite time and prophetic time and probationary time. And what I mean by that is this. When Ellen White says no more time, what she's doing is this. She's taking this prophecy that looks like this, and no more time, that phrase, what it actually means is that what you can't do is this. You can't take this date and shuffle it forward. So this is no. You can't move that. It's got a fixed beginning point. That's what she means by no more time. So when we get to 2019, November the 9th, and you get to November the 10th, and you don't like the look of things, what you can't do is do time. And what I mean you can't do time is, what you can't do is to do this. Is to shuffle 2019, November the 9th, and say, oh, you know what we'll call it? We'll call it December the 2nd, or January the 5th, 2020. You can't change that date. No more time means don't change the date.
Would that not mean definite then? Definite.
To suit yourself. Sorry?
Would that not mean it's definite time? So it's a set time?
Yes. So when Ellen White says no more time, she means don't change the date, because definite is in the context of fixed. So if someone's saying after 2019 there is no more time, the statement is factually correct, but they've twisted it that's what they're saying, to mean that you can't do any more dates afterwards. That is not what Ellen White actually means. She means in this context that after October, you can't change the 2300-day prophecy, you can't move it. And if you don't like, or things happen in a way that you find that are going to be unexpected after November the 9th, what you can't do, which I suspect will be tempted and inclined to do, is say, let's reevaluate, let's go back to this history here and see if we made a mistake somewhere, that date isn't a good date, that we might have to go to a different date. So if we're talking about no more time, that's what that no more time would be. It'd be no more time, don't change the date to suit yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't calculate dates after that. I think it's been demonstrated by the structure of the 2520, where you go to 1863, and the logic that we can develop based upon that.
Can we say it's like the Three Angels' messages, where she stresses you can't move the location of the messages. So in the same way she's using this argument about definite time, that those prophecies have been located on the line in a place, and just like the Three Angels' messages, because it's the Three Angels' messages, all those time prophecies, and you can't move the location of them because they're established there, and that lays that foundation. If you try and move the location, you're doing the same like when we move the location of Three Angels' messages, it does away with the foundation.
Yes. So when you start talking about the foundations, you get this similar idea. You know, sometimes you'll talk about foundations, sometimes you talk about a platform, sometimes you'll talk about beams and pillars, but she also talks about pegs and pins. And almost invariably, when you have the pegs and pins, what she's talking about is the location of the pegs and pins. If you do a study on pegs and pins, I think you can demonstrate that the pegs and pins are doctrines or concepts or ideas. And the thing that's unique about the pegs and the pins, a pin is a small peg, so they're important and less important doctrines, but it's about the location, and what you can't do is move the location of those pegs and pins. And the purpose of the pegs and pins are to tie beams together. So as soon as you take a pin out, the beams come out of their place and they collapse, and the platform just disintegrates. So you can all conceptualize when you're building this model that what is important is not to have a bag of nails. A bag of doctrines don't help you. So the doctrine of the 2300 days in and of itself is useless. When does the 2300 day pin have any use? When you take it out of the bag and you nail it in a certain place and it has its location. If you try and pull the location out and move it somewhere else, it won't serve its purpose. So to answer Sarah's question, yeah. Hopefully that answers that question.
You said, speaking of November 10th, 2019, you said it in kind of a way like you expected, that we're going to, at that point, be tempted to go back and reevaluate our calculations. Why would you expect that we're going to be tempted?
So yes, I am. If you read that into it, I've got a feeling, a hunch that we're going to come to that day. Things are not going to look like we're expecting, and we're going to be tempted to reevaluate. So we know that the Millerites were dealing with two issues. They were dealing with the issue of time and location. They're the two issues that they're grappling with, and what they would call location, which is the location of the sanctuary, I'm equating to event. I'm not saying it's a geographical location. It's an event, which I'm saying is the equivalent of their location. So, if we're tracking Millerite history to the very letter, and I think in many ways we are, in ways that perhaps we're not even still fully conscious of, then I think there's a strong possibility that we'll get to the date and things won't look the way we're expecting, so people will want to reevaluate time.
So you're saying there's going to be a disappointment?
Yes. I think the disappointment is at least on the numbers of people that we're going to have, and I think the numbers are partly due to people failing that test. We're going to come to the place and it's not going to be what we're expecting to be in some shape or form, and then people are going to question.
Yeah.
So I think there's some legitimacy in drawing that truth out of the Millerite history.
Do you have a second witness?
Brother Aaron, right?
Something you've taught for about a decade, that Revelation 10 applies more to us than the Millerites. And you know why, because you've taught it. And also,
Revelation 10 applies more to us than the Millerites. So there's a disappointment in Revelation 10. That's not the second witness I'm asking him for, but go ahead.
I think the second witness is very great. And our great disappointment comes from the little book that we eat. It comes from our message. Not just because our friends aren't with us and stuff like that. So I think we really have to study this message probably a lot more than we are.
Does that mean the date isn't correct? Something that when that time comes, it's going to be determined that the date was not correct. The November 9th.
The people that failed the test will come to that conclusion.
Yeah.
Because the Millerites, the date was correct.
So the date will be correct, but it's just some will fall away because they didn't believe it.
It doesn't look like they didn't.
Doesn't look like what they expected. What I was trying to draw him out on, and maybe he doesn't, but I thought that I picked this up from you, is based upon your presentation of the Great Controversy, the passage where she talks about probation closing and the day-to-day life activities just continue on and people don't even realize it closes.
Oh, yes.
Therefore, when we hit Raffia, it may be I'm thinking it's going to be a pretty big publicity thing about Trump or Putin or some combination, but we're getting so many Trump-Putin news flashes all the time anyway, that it can truly fulfill what we're expecting, but we're going to be tempted to think, no, this is just another news cycle, and some of us are going to jump ship. But I thought that's what you were inferring from what you were teaching. That's what I was trying to draw out of you, but you may disagree with that.
No, I agree with that. It wasn't in the forefront of my mind.
Okay.
So just to answer Sister Shimula's query or question, I'm not in any way suggesting that 2019 is not the correct date. The Millerites had that correct, we have that correct. I would also like to just add into the mix here that despite the fact that we say that they had the location incorrect, because we make a strong emphasis on that, I think you can make an argument that in the Midnight Cry message itself, they have the location correct as well. It's not as simplistic to say that they've got a geography problem, that they've dragged the sanctuary from heaven to earth. In the Midnight Cry message itself, even though the movement, the people in the movement aren't fully cognizant of it, they haven't seen it, the message itself has the correct sanctuary location in there, and they miss it. So to me, it's not even so simple to say that they had the time right but the location wrong. They have everything correct. And I'm just saying that we also have everything correct. We've got our equivalent of the location, the event is correct, and the timing is correct. But like the Millerites, even though they had it given to them correct, they still are not
Had a disappointment.
willing or able to see that information, that it's not visible to them because they're not paying attention to what's going on. And in that lack of attention, when the test comes, they fail. Many of them fail.
If we expect to be disappointed, then it wouldn't be, I think, a disappointment in a sense. I don't know if we're...
I'm not convinced of that argument. I get it. You know, we all know if time continued, we're all going to die. You know, your loved ones are all going to pass away. We know that. when it happens, everybody gets caught short and everybody gets disappointed. You know, just because you anticipate pain happening, it doesn't mean you're immune to the experience of the pain when it comes. So I don't think that actually helps. The fact that we know it's coming, we're sure it's coming, but when it comes, it still touches you. Things.
I know we studied in the last days that numbers of chapters and verses, they have some meanings. So the number 19, the chapter 19 from the Great Controversy is talking about the disappointment of apostles and Millerites. If you read this chapter, so I think that's the second testimony that number 19, 2019 could be a disappointment for us. Because Ellen White refers like to generation apostles, they were disappointment about the same message, Daniel 9. They went with Daniel 9. Millerites with Daniel 8:14. So we are in the Daniel 11:40 to 45. So when we talk about this in the chapter 19, talk about these two disappointments of two generations, of two churches without spot, Ephesus and Philadelphia. We had another generation, another church, the triumphant church, 144,000, without spot. So I believe this number 19 of this chapter could be a disappointment for us.
Is there a possibility that it could be a case where something happens on the 9th of November but we don't find out after the fact, until after the fact? Do you know that the Millerites, 11th of August happened, but they didn't know until like September? But yeah, so it could be something does happen, but we don't know after the fact. So how would that look like, or would that look like a disappointment to us? Or
Yeah, as you say, it could do. Even if you take October 22nd, the event happens, and it's only the next day that I don't know how many men are in the barn, 2 or 3. You know, it's only then that the information begins to come out. That for those who weren't in the know at that very time, they're kind of left in the dark. And it takes time or traction for that message to consolidate and to be rebuilt. So yeah, that may happen.
Brother Jeff had touched on this point yesterday to do with lich and snow, and it's a previous study he's done, I think, many a time before. And I've done a short study on those 2 years, and I'm convicted that when you look at 9/11, you have 2 years between those two numbers, 9, 10, 11, that signifies 2 years. And when you look at between 9 and 11 is 2 years, and so when you look at the number 9, that's the month of September. When you look at 11, that's the month of November. They're both in the fall season, and every prophetic prediction that was made was exactly fulfilled with 2 years between them, i.e. 1838 to 1840, 1842 to 1844, 2012 to 2014. It appears to be a recurring repetition of events with predictions and their fulfillment. Therefore, this year in 2018, if there has been, and there has been, a prediction made of the midnight cry to be fulfilled in 2019, I believe to be in line with the order of historical events, i.e. prophecies and predictions fulfilled within a 2-year time span, then it would seem to be more accurate or correct that as a midnight prediction of 2018 is carrying out in its fulfillment, it should be done so following another 2 years, which would bring you to the year 2020, 2021. And that's my understanding, because a prediction has been made this year. And if you follow in line with the every prediction that's ever been made, it's always a pattern of being fulfilled 2 years later as opposed to the very next year. So that was just, I wasn't going to say this, but it seems to have come to that. It came to that. I was convicted to speak and say this, but I don't know if that's relevant or fits in.
If you look at Sister Tessie's presentation that she did in Arkansas particularly, this argument of 2 years
Yes.
is where she develops the date for 2020. It was done through a different line of argument than the presidential cycles of the church, which is a 5-year cycle, and the US government, which is a 4-year cycle, and they come to a confluence point in 2020 because we had our last general election in 2015 and the government had it in 2016, so they merged in 2020. Brings you to that focal point of 2020. Sister Tessa had understood 2020 using that 2 years to take you from 18 to 20. Not in exactly the same way that you've used it, but it's that 2-year repeating pattern that was picked up to do that. So I think we're aware of that, yeah.
Written questions.
This was just the first question. so just making sure we'll finish that one before LGF can do the next one.
Can you explain the concept of self-same in link with the covenant lines? I don't think it's that big of a concept, but I can do it. I can show you why I understand it that way. What I was saying is that when it came to the story of Moses, that you can mark the covenant at the Red Sea crossing based upon the word self-same. And there's 15 references of the word self-same in the Bible. The first one is in Genesis 7:13. And it says, "In the self-same day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and Noah's wife, and 3 wives of his sons with them, into the ark." Okay, I'm saying closed door, but he's entered into covenant relationship with that family. Self-same day. The next reference is in Genesis 17:23. It says, "And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among them of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day." Covenant. Verse 26. "In the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son." Exodus 12:17. "And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for in this selfsame day have I brought your armies out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day in your generations by an ordinance forever." And in chapter 12, verse 41 of Exodus, "And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, even the selfsame day it came to pass, that all the host of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt." And verse 51 says, "And it came to pass the selfsame day that the Lord did bring the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their armies." I was just using the word self-same and suggesting that it is a symbol of the covenant when you've seen it. There's more. That's the first 5 or 6 references. And that the covenant relationship for ancient Israel began at the Red Sea crossing, and that's when the 40 years began. But they have 10 tests that takes 2 years. When they fail that 10th test, they're actually in 2 years. So that's as much as I understand about the question. It's just a simple word study, that self-same is a symbol of the covenant. Your turn.
So I've kind of answered this one. Well, Elder Jeff helped. What will things look like after November the 9th for the priest? How do you foresee day-to-day life? Sorry? So I just want to read from Great Controversy. This is GC 615. GC 615. When God's presence was finally withdrawn from the Jewish nation, priests and people knew it not. Though under the control of Satan, GC 615, though under the control of Satan and swayed by the most horrible and malignant passions, they still regarded themselves as the chosen of God. The ministration in the temple continued. Sacrifices were offered upon its polluted altars, and daily the divine blessing was invoked upon a people guilty of the blood of God's dear Son and seeking to slay his ministers and apostles. So, when the irrevocable decision of the sanctuary has been pronounced and the destiny of the world has been forever fixed, the inhabitants of the earth will know it not. The forms of religion will be continued by a people from whom the Spirit of God has been finally withdrawn, and the satanic zeal with which the Prince of Evil will inspire them for the accomplishment of his malignant designs will bear the semblance of zeal for God. So, all I want to pick up from here is that in the history of the Jews, and when Michael stands up, this is chapter 39, the time of trouble, that when that event happens, that essentially the people of the earth won't know that it's happened. There's not going to be any token that the close of probation has just happened. Life will just carry on as normal. We know that the plagues are going to begin at, I don't think they're going to begin at this time, I think they begin a little bit later. I think it's when the death decree happens. So life is sort of looking normal. There's one or two other passages which speak about it in the sense that people essentially just get up for work and they carry on going go to work. There's going to be a level of normality, and I think if you just go back to either documentaries or books, or if you ever watched a movie on the Second World War, millions of people are being killed, but there is this level of normality when people are on ration cards, they can't buy food, life just sort of carries on. People become accustomed to it, and I think we're 17 years past 9/11, and some of us have grown up in this culture. If you were, maybe 10 or 11 when that happened, all you know is a post 9/11 experience. But for those of us who are older, just travel through an airport, it's just a different world. You can't imagine. You look back and you think, how did they ever let you get away with those things being so lax? But I think it's the other way around, really. That was the norm. And today is what's strange and weird, that you can't even take a bottle of water on an airplane. It's become so, surreal. But despite that, we just accept it, because it's just happened in degrees. You go to an airport and they zap you for 3 seconds every time you get through with this powerful machine, and who knows what it's doing to us. We just accept it. There's nothing you can do if you want to travel. You just put up with it. Who knows what going up and down on the all of these things are doing things to us that we've just become acclimatized to. So I think we're already so far down the road we don't even realise it. It doesn't take many more steps for us to come to a place where you look back and you think the world is really different, and we just think it's normal. So the question was, what is life going to be like for the priest? I guess that's a slightly different answer than what is it going to look like to the world, because it says from the Jewish nation, and it says today the inhabitants of the earth. So she's comparing the inhabitants of the earth, those people in the world, to the inhabitants of the Jews. But this is not the same as what's happening to the priest. If you really want to see what's happening to the priest, I guess you'd have to look at what's happening to the disciples when these events are happening. Sister Amy, you have a...
Yeah, sorry, the next paragraph, not the next paragraph, but the one after that, it says, the people of God will then be plunged into those scenes of affliction and distress described by the prophet as the time of Jacob's trouble, and she goes on to talk about Jacob. So I was going to make that point, isn't it the fact God's people know, because their experience now changes. Because when Jacob's wrestling with that angel, that's a different experience. He definitely knows about it.
So between those two paragraphs, there's 615 paragraph 2. This is the death decree.
Yeah.
So I think once the close of probation happens, there's a period of time that's after that.
So it's when the death decree
which is the
was
death decree. It says this argument will appear conclusive, and a decree will finally be issued against those who hallow the Sabbath or the fourth commandment, denouncing them as deserving of the severest punishment, and giving the people liberty after a certain time to put them to death. So this is the decree. It's not being killed yet, but it's the decree that's going to plunge them into scenes of affliction. So I don't think that's going to happen when Michael stands up. But in this time period, the disciples' lives have changed, because she's comparing the death of Christ, the cross, with Michael standing up to take that change of dispensation. So there is some difference between them. The disciples are running scared, they're incognito, they're hiding, even though nothing is really happening to them. So I think there will be some changes to our lives. But I did want to say one point on this thing. Often when we talk about our history, we focus on our history like this is the beginning or the be-all and end-all of everything. But if you take just a simple plain reading of Spirit Prophecy, she'll begin her story in 1798, bring you to 1844, and then she'll skip all of this history and essentially bring you all the way to the Sunday law, then the close of probation and the second advent. And in this history here, it's pretty much blank. There is there's no real major events or things that she's talking about. It's just this singular history. And if we were going to try to explain what that history looked like, I would say that it's the former reign, because we know that this is the latter reign. We have a lot of information on these two histories, and we have a lot of information about this history. But in between here, there's not much going on. Probably the biggest thing you're going to pick up is, I guess you could pick up 1863, you could pick up 1888. But besides that, there's not much. The target is all dealing with the Sunday law. So when we start thinking about this waymark here, which is 2019, which we construct through various pieces of logic. I guess what my observation on this point is that 2019 at one level is a stepping stone that's going to bring you to this history. If this is Raphia, this would be Panium, and then we'd have 14 and 9/11, and there are a number of other waymarks in between that, and obviously 89. So we have these waymarks that are all bringing you up to these major events that Ellen White's speaking of. So in that scale, even though we're expecting things to happen in this history which have characteristics which resemble what's going to happen here, these are just still stepping stones that bring you to these major events. So whatever we're talking about here, which is the close of probation, and we're going to mark this as the close of probation, for sure it'll have characteristics that are similar to this, but they won't be in the same degree as we're expecting here, because if it was in the same degree, this history wouldn't exist. This would be the end of everything. So whatever life is going to look like in 2019, even for the priests, they'll have those characteristics when we start thinking about Judas and the Sanhedrin and the Romans, this threefold union coming together to make war against Jesus, and that happens at midnight at the brook Kidron. So we know all of that, and we can mark that all here at 2019. So we see all of that, but I think it may not be it's definitely not going to be as severe as what's going to happen here at the close of probation, or what's going to happen here at the Sunday law. So I think there's going to be this escalation of trouble that's coming upon us. It's not all going to hit us with the ferocity that our lines might indicate.
Could you say around 2019 will be more internal?
Internal,
like persecution, rather than how it's described in Great Controversy?
I don't want to say it's only going to be internal. There are not going to be external influences. I think all of those things that we read are going to impact us there. But it may not be in exactly the same fashion that we're expecting or that we read about in those passages. I think it will follow the same line of thought, the same ideas, but I don't think it's going to be to the same intensity. Because if it was, you know, the whole society would be collapsing here. And we know that 2019, things are about to switch fairly rapidly when you come to Panium. America's going to be doing some, you know, radical dancing around in changing its position to become being the underdog to being the one that's in charge, that's supreme, and that's just the beginning of its steps from Panium up to the point that you get to Sunday Law, where it begins to really become the premier superpower. So I think pretty much the world is going to be looking as it does. Life will just carry on normally. For the priests, I think there'll be some changes. I'm not sure that they're going to be as severe as we may imagine that they're going to be. And perhaps this is going to be part of the thing that will trouble us when 2019 comes, if those thoughts that we mentioned before are going to be fulfilled in the way that I'm suggesting. So I'm not saying it's business as normal, but I don't think it's going to be all hell's broken loose and we're going to be running away to the mountains. Because that's what happens just after the close of probation. We flee because of fear of what the world's about to do to us. And you know, we're not about to flee in 2019 to run away and abandon everything, because we've got a lot more history to go through, a lot of work still to do. So I don't know whose question that was. Got answered. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to know what your thoughts were in terms of the priests. You know, some people have investments which might take a few years to profit, I'll put it that way. So we're just wondering how things would look in terms of continue to make these investments, or you know, maybe to think differently about them.
So I don't know if you're talking about like voluntary contributions to a pension or something.
It could be anything. Yeah. Well,
that could be weird. That's cool.
So there are some necessary debts, like rental payment or a mortgage if you're already locked into that. But there are other things which are sort of more voluntary. You know, if here in the UK you're obliged to pay to your state pension, you don't have a choice to do that. It's just taking that straight out of your salary. But you don't have to make additional contributions. So I was going to say, I guess whatever age you are, I don't know if it's worth doing that. You know, in the timescale that we're indicating here. So I don't know. Investments don't seem like a wise idea to me.
Go ahead.
Me? Yeah, it was just about what you just said. I've looked at that, Tom, and I decided not to join the pension, and they haven't taken the money out of mine because you can fill in a form called an SF12 or something.
Yeah, only if it depends what your income level is. If it's below 6,000, it's voluntary contributions.
Well,
above 6,000, you don't have a choice.
Right, well, I haven't.
Or whatever that level
Well, I
is.
filled in this form and I said that I don't want them to join a pension. And that was my decision, and I'm not. They don't take contributions out of my salary. And I haven't paid, and that was my decision because I knew what was going to come ahead. I didn't see the sense in joining.
Don't want to deviate too much, right? But what happens is, I'm not going to say it's a bad decision that you've made, but in the UK, by law, every company has to provide you a pension scheme. And what happens is, by law, they have to contribute into your pension scheme. If you refuse to take the company pension scheme, then you are paying more national insurance into the UK government scheme. Either way, it's going to cost you money. So it always makes, regardless of what's going to happen, it makes financial sense to do the company scheme, because you actually pay less national insurance, so your contribution is going to be less than if you don't do the scheme, and the company puts money into your scheme, and when you reach 55, you can draw your pension when you're 55. So just take the company pension scheme, because you pay less tax and they put money into your pot, and if you're approaching 55, all good, because then you can start drawing your pension as soon as you can. You do, you pay more national insurance.
I haven't paid.
Like, I don't know about those tax
Okay.
I don't want to go against your logic, and I'm not going to go against your logic, but I'm watching some of these people. There's one personality that comes to my mind, and when he left a message, there's been about 3 or 4 times since he left a message that he'll try to taunt me with saying, what are you going to do when Raffia doesn't get fulfilled? So what I'm saying is, based upon, I agree with what you were saying, that when probation closes, the wicked aren't going to see it. But the righteous, I expect they know it, okay? But the people that have been part of the righteous and have left the platform leading up to that date, they're fully aware, they're fully engaged right now. There's enemies of this message that we hadn't heard about for years that are now back on the internet going after this message because we're time setting. They know about November 9th, 2019. I expect that they're going to be more vicious than ever on November 10th, 2019 than they've ever been. And we've been told the greatest persecution comes from within, and I think these people will be more of being within us than the next phase of the Levites and the Nethinims. It's going to be harder for you to take the criticism that I'm throwing at you publicly, because you knew we were friends, you knew we worked together. I get off the platform and I come after you. I agree, we're not running to the mountains at that point in time, but I think there's a severity there at the beginning that is greater than the persecution at one level than comes as we progress through that history. But that's I'm not trying to deny anything that you said.
Which is what happens in October the 23rd. And you've given all your cows away or whatever, and you haven't dug up your potatoes, and they start this persecution, which makes you look really silly.
Yeah, I think that's going to happen.
So?
Yeah, I suppose when I said investments, I wasn't really talking about pension. So, for example, if I'm working a 9-to-5 job right now, I'm struggling to get into the country, but I have a business idea, and I could take a business loan to invest in a business, but it's not going to yield returns until like 5 or 6 years down the line. It's those kind of decisions that I was thinking about, like, would it be worth doing that at this point? Or some people want to start businesses, others want to are in uni or things like that. There's people in uni around the world. So I don't know how you foresee it looking after that. Do you think we'd have a long amount of time to be able to get some of these things in place?
When I get asked questions like this, I hate to give financial advice because, who am I to do such a thing? All I do know is when you go back to the Millerite history, there were a few brave souls between April and July/August who were, as I say, brave enough to basically disengage from the world. They began to sell off their assets or give them away before they even heard what Snow was doing. But very few of them were doing that. After August, the numbers begin to build up. People become more confident that October is really there, it's going to happen, it's genuine, and they begin to, give up a lot more readily, things readily. A few days before they're going to shut up their businesses, the day before they're going to give their cows away or whatever it is. They're not going to pull up their crops because they know it's just a waste of time, it will all rot. They don't want to spend the time and energy to do that. So if you just take the Millerite history, it seems to me that they're disengaging from business enterprise, not accelerating business enterprise, because they're pretty sure that they're correct on that in that time setting. 2019, if what we're saying is correct about that, I believe that we are. Once you go from 2019, there is more than one voice who's speaking about 2020 and 2021. So when you start thinking about that kind of time scale, and we're going to start marking, if we started marking Panem at 2021, that's only, depending on where we're going to, what part of the year we're going to do that, that's either 13 months or 13 months plus 12 months or whatever it is. It's 1 to 2 years max where we've basically got to Panem, and now we're into the close of probation, obviously for the Levites, but we could argue we're now into the close of probation for Adventism. But externally, the world is a different place now. Russia has been, toppled essentially, and what is that toppling going to look like if nothing more than a severe internal revolution as the Russians themselves depose Putin from off the throne. So there's going to be havoc when that happens, and when that happens, the economy of Europe is going to collapse for sure, because our economies are driven by the natural gas that comes from Russia. So once that gas gets turned off, we don't have a gas supply anymore for vast swathes of Europe, and there's no alternative for that. They're not going to ship it in by tankers from the Middle East or the United States. They've got nothing really in place. You'll know that only a few years ago, I think it was Germany, they made a decision to shut down all nuclear plants. Crazy decisions such as those, based upon false premises of global warming. I'm not arguing whether global warming is right, I don't mean that, I don't make that point. But what I'm saying is that fairly rapidly, from where we are now, within the next 2 years at least, the economy of the world is going to start crumbling. And if what we're saying about the United States and Donald Trump is accurate, and I believe that it is, as he begins to take grip or control of the United States, the economy there is going to go sour really quickly. It always happens when you get dictators, because dictatorships are driven by economic collapses. So I'm not sure how an investment is actually going to materialize in an environment where everything around us is collapsing. And it's happening rapidly. So even though we might have 5 or 6 years before you get to Daniel 12:1, I don't think it's 5 or 6 years before you get to the Sunday law. I don't know how long the Sunday law history is going to be. I mean, our history has been 4 years. It's going to be a lot shorter than that. For certain, we know that, because we know that the Sunday law for the Levites is 2019 to what appears to be 2021, so that's only a 2-year history. And our history has been 5 years, our Sunday law, 2014 to 2019. You've gone from 5 years to 2 years. Then you have the next dispensation, if that, on that scale, it's going to be less than 2 years, and the Sunday law would be even less. So we're rapidly running out of time. And you can't just mark close of probation and say, I'll get my money out by close of probation, Daniel 12:1, because the institutions that control our world are going to be collapsing as well. So it becomes difficult to keep a handle on your investments. So I don't want to put people off, you know, in their aspirations, but I think we may run out of time to start thinking about entering into a business enterprise or making some kind of investment if we haven't done so already. And if you've already done that, it may be prudent to begin to think how to extricate ourselves from those things. If you've got a business going, you might want to think about setting up and trying to get some whatever profit you can before either the business collapses or the institutions basically take control over our assets in a way that we won't be able to manage. So it seems to me a risky venture to start thinking about business proposals on the pretext that we want country property. I'm all for country properties, I'm not opposed to it, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of everything. Especially when we consider, I think even in Africa, I mean most of Africa is rural, and they're already predicting, I think by 2024, I think it was that kind of date, that I think they're saying like over 50%, or I can't remember the percentages, of Africans are going to be in the cities. So this rural society that's the last vestiges are in continents like Africa or South America, that's all changing, the demographics are changing. Our message is in the cities, and if we're going to be doing any kind of work, we're going to have to go to the cities to do that work.
Yeah.
So again, I'm not against country living, but we're going to be spending a fair bit of time in the cities, and if we're going to me, I don't know how easy it is to manage the risks, the downside of those investments, if we're not already into them now. If we are, I think we might be considering coming out as opposed to entering into new ventures. Because the only reason you'd want to do that is to get country property, I presume. Because unless you're dreaming about not doing, but generally like making lots of money to get a nice car or a nice house, which I doubt you do. So to me, the pretext would be for country living. And if you'd want to make those kind of risks to get country property, I think there are probably alternative ways of doing that, far safer, like renting or joining together with brethren who you're comfortable to live with. There are alternatives than going into a business venture. There's some things that got short returns, some things are longer returns. And that's separate and distinct from the distraction of having your own business. Ask anybody who has their own business how distracting it is. It's mentally draining. It's far easier to be employed, do a 9-to-5 job and walk away from it. That's my experience of being in business.
Yeah.
And I think a couple of people could allude to that, agree. It's not that easy to go into business and get into some kind of venture. Okay, so someone's asked a question. Can I ask about, they're asking, what does the Sunday law in 2014 even mean? Actually, it's lots of questions. So that one, I'm going to hopefully this time.
Do you want to answer that tonight, or you want to do that tomorrow?
I'm going to say I'm going to try and hopefully answer that in the presentation if I get time. So I'm going to skip that one. The next one is, can you discuss how 2014 is the judgment of the living? That's a bit of a long answer, so I'll do that tomorrow perhaps. And what does this do to our understanding of it beginning at 9/11? So it's 3 questions. One of them is, what is the Sunday law at 2014? I'll try and address that one. The other one is 2 questions in one. Can you explain the relationship between 2014 and 9/11 and how the judgment of the living is operating between those 2 waymarks? And I'll probably do those if we have a Q&A maybe tomorrow.
And I have one I'll do tomorrow as well. What? Yeah.
When you were talking, we have to remember too that there will be a civil war, and I've heard from somebody recently that they thought maybe we're in the Civil War now in the United States, but when you get back into the history and you realize what the Civil War was like, we're not in the Civil War yet. It was bad. It was one of the worst wars there were. Well, I don't know if it was the worst. But
Yeah, it was more people died in the Civil War than any other war in the United
so
States.
if we've been told by Spirit of Prophecy that we're going to have another Civil War, I don't understand how people can say that we're already starting into ours. I mean, maybe the very first stages of what causes a Civil War are starting. I can understand that. But you weren't saying don't go into the city. You were just saying don't go into the venture that will cause you to be in a mess in the city. Is that what you were saying?
I think
No.
not quite.
You can answer.
Someone was asking about should we enter into business ventures?
Yeah, I understand
and
that.
to me, I'm reading into the question of why would you want to do a business?
Yeah.
There's two reasons. Either you want to make a lot of money and get a nice house, and I don't think that would be the reason. The other one that people often cite is that they can't afford to move to the country. So if they had a side business where they could make, I guess, a lot of money quickly, because you're not going to make it in a regular job, it would be the engine behind buying a country property. And I'm saying while country property is very important, it's not the be-all and end-all of everything. And I think...
Oh, to own your own.
Yes.
But to be out in it is important.
Yes, I'm saying that there are better ways of doing it. One of them would be just to
I
rent
agree.
or to join up with someone. And 2-3 people, if you're single, there are other ways of doing it instead of going to a business venture to earn enough money to outright buy your own property.
Because I can see a lot of people in our ministry that are starting to, why we're able to help around the world right now, I think it's because we're seeing some dedicated people that are seeing money in their bank and they are realizing they don't want the Sunday law or the priest time period to end and they've got all that money in their bank account. And I think that they're starting to, say, what good is this money in my bank? So, we're seeing an uptick, and I don't know how long it'll last for, but definitely is the time to get rid of some stuff.
And the only thing I said about country living in the city is not living in the city, but half of the world already lives in the city. So when we're going to give the message to the Levites or the Nephilim of the world, they're not going to come into the country to hear the message. We have to go to them.
No, but Enoch did lead them into the country.
Yes, so it's not an argument against country property, but I'm suggesting that it's not country property or nothing.
Yeah.
If the country property comes with a price, and sometimes if that price is too high, you either don't do it or you look for an alternative. And I'm suggesting that getting entangled into business ventures to facilitate purchasing a country property may not be the right way to move forward. That's what I was suggesting.
I agree with that 100%. I thought I heard you say that maybe we have to go into the cities and live there.
No,
I was hearing you
to
say
work,
that.
not to
I was
live.
thinking, not 1 in 100 are going to be saved in those cities.
No. Should we pray? Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and mercy. We want to ask for a special blessing. We thank you, Lord, for the joyous Sabbath that we've had together, the peace that this country affords us. Lord, give us rest this evening and help us to be ready, refreshed for another day of fellowship and study tomorrow. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.